This is how Cartoon Network described it when it came out. Oh brother, hold on to your jawbreakers because Ed, Edd and Eddy are back this November in a brand new feature-length movie. This time, Eddy has gone too far and pulled a prank that has the whole neighborhood gang after him, and only one person can save him. His legendary, never-before-seen older brother. Cartoon Network kicks off this fun Best of Ed, Edd and Eddy marathon and wraps up the night with a huge movie event. So round up your buddies for this hilarious premiere. So this was the promotion for when this movie was originally coming out. It was at the end of a huge marathon, and Cartoon Network really held Ed, Edd and Eddy highly. One of their most iconic shows of all time, and it's yet such a simple show about just kids growing up in this cul-de-sac called Peach Creek. So cul-de-sac's eerie, quiet, and the lane is completely destroyed. Ed, in a panic, rushes and immediately begins filling up one of his socks with his many belongings as he can, including his sponge collection, some buttered toast, and it's just something is clearly going on that's really intense, and we're just completely left in the dark about it. Meanwhile, at Double D's house, he's sobbing, and his belongings are all packed up as if he's never coming home, and he tries to write a letter explaining his incident to the parents, but is overcome with tears of guilt. We just keep getting more and more confused about what's going on. Like, usually an episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy is all about a scam, and this seems to be taking place after the scam, which is very intriguing. At Eddy's house, Eddy's seen packing up his personal items into a suitcase, panicking, and he hears somebody outside the back door. It feels like a horror movie at this point, but it's cinematic, so it feels good. Ed rushes in, hoisting Double D out of his sock, and they all hurry to escape. They sense the other kids coming and manage to hide in Eddy's brother's room, using the wallpaper to camouflage and disguise the door, though it's kind of poor. The dialogue is very slim up until this point. Keep forgetting that Ed, Edd and Eddy is a very storyboard-driven show. Like, the dialogue isn't as plot progressing as you would think. A lot of their content is very based on, like, Three Stooges, where it's a lot of slapstick humor, a lot of funny animations, and it's all about stretching the imagination from basic premise of just having kids growing up in a cul-de-sac. It kind of gives me a lot of Rugrats vibes. It's a bunch of kids and their imaginations gone like times 100, and it's always fun to watch, and it's just really cool. While the Eds cower in a corner, Eddy accuses their current situation of being Double D's fault. Eddy pushes Ed over to the door to listen to the other kids, using a glass to hear, but Ed startles him with a loud crunch as he begins eating the toast from his sock. Ew, this is disgusting. The noises cause the kids to discover where the Eds are hiding, and they break the door. Eddy and Double D desperately try to escape through the window and a heat vent, which are both closed off by bricks, and Ed attempts to ride away on a preserved camel in the room, which pitches him backwards into a fire alarm box marked "in case of movie break glass," which is a really funny joke.
Case of movie break glass!
Bingo! Eddy breaks open the box, but it only contains a peanut. Just then the kids manage to break open the door, enough for Ed to break open the peanut with anxiety, revealing that there's a key hidden in it. I don't know how they got that hidden in there, but okay. Eddy immediately recognizes that the key is to his brother's car. So the Eds pile in. Finally, all the kids rush in, but they are horribly maimed in one way or another. Like, Ralph's has much of his midsection bitten off. Oh my god, this is gross. Kevin is bruised and burned. Johnny's head is clenched by a bear trap. Plank is nicked and cracked, and Naz has most of her hair sheared off and is only wearing a cardboard box. Oh my god, I don't know what this prank was, but guys, this has gone way too far, clearly. Ed thrusts his feet into the car floor, but instead of driving the car, he actually smashes through the house with his feet through the bottom of the car, kind of doing it Flintstone style. The kids, meanwhile, pursue Ed in a wild chase through the cul-de-sac. Ralph nearly manages to drag Ed out of the car in this high-speed chase that isn't actually power-driven. And then the junkyard and the construction site, all the regular mainstay locations from the show. They do manage to catch the Eds, and in a brief moment, Ed and Double D pin the blame on each other, so it's clear that something's going on between them just as much as what they did. Kevin warns the dorks have not seen the last of him. So Kevin jumps on his bike with Naz following him, and they set off to go get the boys himself. I'm the most scared of Ralph in this moment, honestly. Sarah and Jimmy decide to follow as well, taking a picnic lunch just for the sake of watching the Eds get clobbered. So they don't really want to play a significant role in it. It just seems like they're all along for the ride. It kind of reminds me of some of those road trip movies where, like, you have all the characters going on their own individual adventure, and You know, so far it has that vibe because it's all the kids trying to attack the Eds, and the Eds are all trying to get away. I mean, that was like a lot of time just running through the regular mainstay of the cul-de-sac, and it's normal in a lot of feature films that the first 20 minutes is the ordinary world before we're breaking into the central plot. But it feels like the central plot was already set up, and this is just 20 minutes of us kind of living in that. Not a lot is revealed or new information in this first 20 minutes, so it does kind of feel like it drags on a little bit. Although this is when it gets a little interesting as the Eds finally leave the cul-de-sac. You know, I always feel like movies need to go beyond what the original episodic show sets up, and I like that they kind of do that immediately off the bat. Although I wish there was a little bit more dialogue-heavy scenes.
But smooth sailing!
The Eds, meanwhile, land in the desert, and their car shambles completely. They realize that they've fully escaped from the kids, but only for now. Eddy and Double D each vent their anger over the situation, and I don't know what's going on between these two. Their relationship is so strained in this so far, but I mean, that always is a good cause for conflict that keeps you watching. This is when Eddy introduces the idea of going to their brother's place, like this is the only guy that could help him, and Double D is a little doubtful, but he eventually agrees, because obviously there's not much options the boys have at this moment. Double D leaves a label on the car marked out of order, which is just, I think you're just excusing littering. Meanwhile, in the cul-de-sac, the kids are preparing to hunt for the Eds. Setting off on their own plans, Johnny and Plank actually become Captain Melonhead and Splinter the Wonderwood, which is exciting because their superhero alter egos from the show are coming into play. Johnny leaps up on his heroic escapade from roof to roof, scouring Peach Creek for the Eds, and all the kids are off to track them down. Meanwhile, Kevin is so harping on the Eds that Naz almost has issues with it, and it seems like these guys are more of a relationship than they've ever been in the actual show, like the way they kind of communicate, which I like a lot better. It seems like that's what this movie really needs, is a little bit more breathing room in terms of character development. Like, usually we don't have a lot of time to get into this huge ensemble of characters, but we do in this film. Like, we have an hour and a half, so let's buckle in. When they crash, Kevin apologizes profusely, and Naz tries to take it, but it turns out to be to the bike and not her. Ralph, after loading Wilfred with weaponry, rides off atop of the pig in pursuit for the Eds. He finds the wreck of the car in the desert, so after lunging out from behind a rock, armed with teeth and thrusting with his pitchfork, he shows Wilfred the scent so they could sniff out the Eds, and he follows on their trail, saying that he will have them by nightfall. The Eds, meanwhile, are marching through a field of cows, eagerly anticipating the arrival of Eddy's brother's plate. A little bit before, Kevin kind of insinuates that Eddy would never go to his brother, because his brother would not be cool with it, almost giving us a little bit more concern for Eddy. Eddy reveals that though he's leading the way, he doesn't actually have a clue where his brother lives. The Eds think this is nuts, until he pulls out a postcard for them to examine. Using a chart, Double D discovers that their past experiences with Eddy's brother's legacies, such as the stink bomb, a hot sauce recipe, and a fake treasure map, that his brother is a jokester, so of course he must be at the gag factory in the nearby town of Lemon Brook. Double D points out that Eddy's brother has to either work there or at the very least be a regular customer in the gag factory. Eddy thinks this is definitely true, so they all head over. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jimmy are skipping happily through the cul-de-sac, looking forward to their picnic lunch. But Jimmy accidentally enters the trailer park where the Kanker sisters live, and because of his bad experiences with the Kankers, Sarah runs off without him, but Jimmy musters up the courage and follows. Jimmy is trapped by the Kankers, and they start to torment him until Jimmy lets it slip that the Eds are actually in danger. Sarah comes in and challenges the Kankers, but she is no match for the three older girls, and is pinned down and tortured by a wet willy. Jimmy tells them that he knows upon seeing this and the Kankers that no harm will happen to their boyfriends, so he decides to hunt the other kids to help the Eds. So the Kanker sisters decide to go on the other kids' trail to help the Eds. Lee has a feeling that Sarah and Jimmy may know where the Eds are going, and so the Kankers hold them hostage while they travel, which is a really funny narrative. Meanwhile, the Eds are walking through the field of sunflowers, Ed and Eddy goof off, attempting to make a jerry-rig sextant to find the gag factory.
What's it called?
It's called a sextant, an astronomical instrument used to...
but they laugh at the word, and this is the closest they come to telling like a dialogue-based inappropriate joke. Eddy snickers and pretends not to hear what Eddy said. Real mature, guys. I mean, but this is what it's like to be a teenage boy, in all honesty. The Eds make it to the factory, where their attempts to break in via the back doors are unsuccessful, prompting them to try the front doors. And as they run around the front of the factory, the camera pans out to a fence of it, ominously marked with the sign that says "Keep Out." Ralph, in the meantime, has gone through the cow area and collects milk as a part of interrogation. I'm not sure how he interrogates, but this sounds perfect. Wilfred ends up following a link of sausages, which baits him into wandering off. Then at the factory, the Ed's broken into the front locked door, but the factory is deserted. It's not really in operation. Once they look at Ed's comic once again, they find out the factory has been out of business for a long time. Eddy and Ed amuse themselves with some of the leftover gags, and Double D attempts to look through the room to find any record of Eddy's brother, but all the papers have turned to dust, essentially, and heads to find Eddy and Ed, which they're being kind of disrespectful. I feel like Double D is doing all the work here, and they're almost acting like two children following their mom along on a road trip. You guys aren't acting realistic. I would be more forgiving if they were more focused on one of their own individual goals, but it just seems like they're just along for the ride, or like each character kind of takes turns being in the back seat to the plot, while one is guiding the way. When you think about the format of the actual show, you know, it's all about the scams, kind of them trying to pull it off, and I feel like most of the time is how it does or doesn't work pulling it off. Over focus on the visual gags and everything, although I am a little bored by some of it. Comical, like it just seems like a lot of hijinks, and I feel like they could at least go like super far with it. I saw this one episode where they turned Eddy into an egg and flipped him on a pan. Where's that? Found a little prank can of jelly beans with 1,000 spring-loaded snakes, and it actually bursts them out of the factory, taking Double D with them, of course, and it all showers down the countryside. Kevin and Naz are able to see this and figure out that it's the gag factory, so they immediately head toward the way. With Wilfred and Ralph only one step behind, they're now in the cow field. Still, when Wilfred revolts against Ralph, attacking in a frenzy and dropping all of Ralph's supplies before running to hide. Ed and Eddy, meanwhile, are searching for Double D, who is stuck at the top of a waterfall. I guess they all landed in different spots. Ed throws Eddy and Double D to dislodge him, but they tumble down the waterfall, both unharmed. He saves him with the trick his brother taught him, and then mentions that his brother is a whiz at harpooning whales, which Double D realizes that since Eddy's brother is a whaler, that maybe he's going to be living near the sea or somewhere near water, so the Eds actually decide to build a boat to follow the river. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jimmy come on out, and they're enslaved by the cankers, who are using them to draw their battle wagon. Jimmy and Sarah break free of the cankers thanks to a clever ploy on Sarah's part, slamming the paint can on Lee's hand. Meanwhile, Johnny and Plank are getting nowhere in their search for the Eds, but Plank decides they should start taking a bus. So despite Johnny's own reservations about getting on a bus, he ultimately is impressed by Plank's determination and declares, "Taking a bus to justice." Kevin and Naz arrive at the gag factory, and it's funny that like all the kids are just getting like an inch a bit closer, but it seems like nobody is going to get the Eds. Like, I should be more worried about the other kids, but they're not showing any threats. Like, I feel like the longer they're on screen and angry, the less effect it has. Like, at the beginning, it was really scary, and it's like, what's going on? But seeing them angry for this long throughout all these events is, like, loosening its impact, and I'm starting to slow down a little bit. Naz flirts with Kevin at the gag factory, but then she falls on a lever, and the factory actually starting up again, and the conveyor belt picks up Kevin's bike, and Naz tries to rescue it because she knows how much it means to him. Kevin manages to rescue his bike, but just as it's about to fall into a mulcher, Naz falls on top of him, knocking them both, and Kevin's bike into it. Oh my god, they're dead! No, I'm just kidding. The Eds sit on a waterfall, building their boat to freedom. To avoid disturbing the wildlife, the boat is in the shape of like a duck. I don't know why it has to look like that. It's SS Mutant, almost a chicken duck. And of course, Ed named that. Sarah and Jimmy are attempting to evade the pursuing cankers as they go through the sunflower field that the Eds were at before. Sarah and Jimmy end up finding Wilfred, and they use like a candy apple to befriend him and ride him out of the sunflowers and escaping the cankers. Meanwhile, Johnny and Plank are still on a bus. I feel like all the extra kids on their adventures toward the Eds also lowers the impact of the stakes, because it's like, it just feels like things aren't getting raised too much, and that's stressful for me. Down the river, Ed's boat ends up getting wrecked because of an unpredictable current that we just dodged watching, I guess. And he says that all he knows is that they're in a swamp in the middle of nowhere, and that his brother would not be impressed at a now ruined boat. Double D loses his cool because it's very disrespectful, and I see like a really big difference between Double D and Eddy now. Like, they're just these conjoined characters up until this point, but now we see that they have different values and morals, and it's coming out at like such a tension-driven time that I almost want to see them fight. I just need more action going on. While Eddy and Ed frolic around the swamp, Double D tries to maintain the order, and he's just giving too much to this at this point. Ed and Eddy suddenly fall into a pool of quicksand and begin sinking. When Double D tries to save them but fails, and then in a really depressing moment, Double D blames himself for their deaths, crying out in utter anguish. And we have a really dark moment where like we actually believe this could have possibly happened. Like, this is the last episode. Like, this is a really dramatic scene. Like, there's a chance this could have I mean, it's a kid's show. We know it wouldn't have. But still, like, the idea that it could have happened is really exciting. Or maybe the movie is just not building up momentum enough that I'm inventing stakes. Ed and Eddy reveal that it was all a joke, and they were only an ankle deep, and Double D is completely violated. He storms off, and him and Eddy go off at each other in the road. Essentially, like, their relationship has gone so bad since this. Like, they've been blaming each other all this time, and now it's kind of headed to a peak. Double D says that Eddy's desire to scam them is what brought them into the big trouble in the first place. Finally, we see like the resentment of all Double D has been doing for the boys boil up, and Eddy attacks back that he wasn't completely innocent either, and that he built the machine in the first place. And it's essentially kind of like taking away from the importance of all their inventions and scams and actually focusing on the characters. And that's a really active choice in this movie, which I really appreciate. Even if the slice of life plot doesn't necessarily translate to a feature film in a super simple way, it's nice to know that stakes are being raised, characters are being developed, and this is still going somewhere. We learn a little bit more about whatever that prank was earlier that we kind of forgot about, and they mentioned that like it's Eddy's fault because he pressed the red button, and I don't know if it was like a machine or like what even happened. Double D decides that he is heading home, to which Ed tries to stop, but like clearly like they're broken up at this point. Like, they're not friends anymore. Eddy is devastated and enraged, saying that he doesn't want to see Double D again, and it was all his fault, but he sinks into tears as we see him like completely break down. Eddy then, unlike something he's ever done before, admits that he is the one responsible for the failed scam that brought them here, calling himself a foul-up wannabe loser, and Double D is touched by Eddy's change of heart when he sees him cry, and they decide to make up and continue onward toward Eddy's brother's house. See, this moment, if this was built up a lot more, if this was like reminded a lot more, I think it would have been a lot more impactful. I definitely think this is the most memorable scene in the entire movie, and I remember this even when I was growing up at the time. Like, this was the part that it really takes it away, but looking back, it doesn't have the same impact I thought it did, because it's not building up. It just kind of explodes. They cry, they have an argument, like it doesn't feel like it's realistic like deterioration of a friendship. It feels like a single fight that happens for 2 minutes, and then it's kind of resolved. But the movie's not over yet, so why would we start talking about resolving it, The Eds continue on their long way, exhausted from the walk, and they end up with a group of fireflies. They call it quits at like this small abandoned park when everybody starts to settle in, including Double D, who labels everything in the vicinity. And the next morning, Kevin walks upwards on his bike, trying to comprehend what happened to Naz, like wondering if she was getting back to him for something that Kevin had no knowledge of. But spots of silhouette of someone appears to be Eddy, so Kevin runs off trying to focus on Eddy, and it's kind of like this deep metaphor for Kevin keeps chasing things that he has no control over. Like, he is going off in all these directions and at the fault of this person he really cares about, Naz. Like, he puts his bike before Naz, it's clear that he needs a little bit more character growth in order to get the Eds. The Eds go racing off for food, Ed and Double D following, and they run off a cliff. But they're saved by a Ferris wheel, and Ed's fear of heights overcomes him. He tries to escape, but the Ferris wheel launches the Eds directly to the amusement park sign. Double D notices that the sign they hit is Mondo a Go-Go, a image on the postcard that Eddy sent about his brother, which means that he actually lives at this park. Oh, thank God, this is finally wrapping up. Eddy's brother lives in that trailer nearby, and then Sarah, Jimmy, while still riding Wilfred, also seem to be heading towards the park. It seems like everything's about to come to a climax. Just as Eddy is about to knock on the door, the Cankers arrive too. They captured Ralph, Kevin, Naz, and all have them tied up. Wilfred, Jimmy, and Sarah come up, and the Eds are alive and well. Everybody is here at this park, but right as the moment they're about to get him, Eddy is at his brother's door. He opens it, his brother comes out, and instead of protecting him like everybody thought and everybody had hoped, that his brother ended up being this really cool. You meet Eddy's brother, and he makes jokes about the kids, calling out Double D as Eddy's girlfriend, and all the expectations of his brother is just completely tarnished. He's disrespectful, he's brutally mistreating his brother, and he even twists his leg around, and this guy's just such a jerk. He's such an older brother that doesn't care clearly about his younger brother, and all the kids seem to value Eddy in a different light, which is essentially what the show's about. It's just a scammer that's like trying so hard to connect with these kids, but he doesn't know how to, because clearly he has an older brother that's always been a bully. And then suddenly the entire show means a little bit more, because it kind of makes sense. It adds up. It's who Eddy is. Eddy is the only one who says he's not a big bad guy deep down, and that all he really wanted was friendship and recognition, something that his older brother never gave him. And oh my god, this is so emotionally sad. Suddenly all the kids come together and actually turn against Eddy's brother, and this is such a beautiful moment. Like, all of them standing up for him at adversity. Like, they've always hated Eddy. They were willing to like murder him at this point. I mean, I don't know if that's like a good thing or not, but in this moment, like, they're truly standing up for him, and it just shows about the unity that Ed and Eddy tries to create. Eddy finally admits that he made up everything he's ever said about his brother, and everybody somehow gets it. Everybody's moved by Eddy's apologies, and the kids and everybody get along one last time and celebrate. Even the Kanker sisters muse over Eddy's brother. Oh my god, my favorite joke is when Double D...
It only took 130 episodes, 4 specials, and a movie, Eddy.
Let's sing a song!
And everybody sings off into the end, and the TV screen says the end, and this is the absolute, like, I definitely think on paper this is the perfect movie. Like, if I saw the script, I'd be like, this is amazing. I just feel like the pacing and how it was carried out with the individual character goals was just so anticlimactic. I feel like the pacing of the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy movie kind of did it a little bit better. But Ed and Eddy did have a lot more emotional payoff, and even though it's slice of life, it did translate to the film in an impressive way. I think it would have been not necessary to be shown in theaters, but it's definitely an amazing send-off, let alone finale of a television show. It's almost like an amazing finale, but kind of a anticlimactic movie, if that makes sense. All around, like, I really enjoyed revisiting this. It definitely feels like the perfect cap on one of my favorite kids shows. I just wish it was as memorable as the show itself, and I feel like other movies have been able to do that successfully. And this, but I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you like Ed and Eddy, and how did you feel when the movie came out? Be sure to comment below and stick around, because Johnny 2000, I'm coming out with an Ed and Eddy video again soon. So I would love to know what you guys thought about this. Okay guys, have a great nostalgic day. Not a lot of movies about superheroes are super successful. Marvel came along later with the Iron Man in 2008, but this was at a time where like superhero movies weren't necessarily a prominent thing. It was kind of more in the TV world anyway. I know they had the Amazing Spider-Man, Batman the Animated Series. For some reason, superhero stories were only working in the TV format, and this is no exception. Powerpuff Girls Movie is essentially the beginning of the entire series, so I consider it the pilot. It's the 70-minute film, feels like it should be in theaters, but for some reason... Oh, no, it was. But the opening shots are actually really pretty. They're just like background art, but they look so vibrant and well drawn, especially for 2025. You could tell this was an early success for Cartoon Network because a lot of the aesthetics and artistic choices are falling in line with how Cartoon Network would inevitably be. For example, like you see a lot of those promos of like the characters in the streets, Billy and Mandy or Courage the Cowardly Dog, and they're all like walking through real world like scenarios. But it looks like a lot of the art from those promos are used in here. So it seems like the Powerpuff Girls movie did play a big part in establishing the identity of Cartoon Network and like what its brand would be. It definitely gives me vibes of like Dexter's Laboratory too. Like it looks a lot like that. So we're thrown into the world of Townsville, and everything is not really in a good spot. The professor is already scared to go to and from the grocery store in his own town, which is kind of a red flag. I don't know, Cartoon Network was really good at creating like a visual language that showed, hey, this is one of the cartoon TV shows. Even though this was essentially a film, the narrator's opening monologue is actually pretty poetic. It's like everything needs a little bit of spice and sugar, and it's talking about like the professor's life, and it's cool because it's like cartoons don't usually have time to do that in short form TV. It's usually just plot, but it seems like they're really good at texturizing all this dialogue so far in this movie. Then we cut to the abrupt opening of the whole thing, and it's like this stressful moment where a monkey is breaking everything in Professor Utonium's lab. The guy who created Samurai Jack also did the same art for this show, and it's very clear. Kind of similar to how Danny Phantom and Fairly Odd Parents have a really similar art style despite being very different shows. I mean, this show was a little bit of Samurai Jack, but you also can see the influences of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Craig McCracken, it was somehow like the perfect combination of the two guys' styles. The title sequence is short and prominent. It's just like literally the logo flying into a black void, which is, it's cute because we hear the girls laughing and giggling, so we already kind of know what's about to happen. After the girls are created, we get to see them in like everyday life, and I love that we actually have the time to do small things like this, like seeing the girls get adjusted to Townsville and their first uses of their powers. They even cut 3 holes into the house to establish that it's going to be their forever home. And it's funny because looking back, it seems like every origin in this show had an explanation to it. You know, like the way the house is set up, the way the town is established. It's very clear it started right here. We get that with a lot of pilots, but it's definitely not a thing for a lot of movies. I know something similar is like the Jimmy Neutron did a pilot type movie where it was the first thing we saw of the characters, and it was a feature length film as opposed to like an episodic plot line. So we didn't necessarily get the full feel of what the series would be, but we're definitely off to a good start. Their powers are like wondrous, and even when they go to preschool for the first time, the kids are excited to meet them. It's a very positive, you know, act 1 to act 2 transition as we start to get to know these girls. The guy Gennady Tarofsky, he's so good at adding silence into cartoons specifically. You know, we're used to a lot of fast-paced comedy dialogue, like there's never a piece of silence, but this guy, literally Samurai Jack, barely had any dialogue, and there's not music, there's sometimes subtle texture noise, like the girls floating. There's just a lot of silence. Silence is used very creatively in this show.
Now, let's begin. Hello, Professor, right on time.
I feel like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends started out doing it this well, and then they eventually got a little bit more quicker with it. As shows became a lot more produced, pilots became a lot more strict, and things just got a little bit rule-based. You could tell the fun and carefreeness is in this film because they're essentially doing things that we now would consider unnecessary, like small moments like that. I never noticed that we actually visually like identify with the professor. I'm not saying like we automatically identify as him, but I feel like the perspective of the movie is told from the professor's perspective because we care about the girls and their safety, which is like kind of the primary concern. We only really feel that they're already established that the Townsville is not a safe place. So seeing them like ease into this is really cute. Professor Utonium comes to pick up the girls and sees that the classroom is like super messy, and he's immediately convinced that it was the girls somehow, and he's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry for them, I didn't think this would happen. And the teacher says like, oh, this is just normal with preschoolers, which remind us that like the girls are actually, you know, just as real as like somebody you would find in real life. They're not different at all, and it's good at establishing that, especially for this next part. Get to see the girls interacting with the other guys and girls their age, and they all initiate in this game of tag. So basically they're taught what tag is, and it's kind of like a disease. And we see the girls get really competitive and actually start to see their like individual quirks come out. As before this, they've been kind of traveling as a unit as these super powered innocent girls. But now we see that there's Blossom, Buttercup, and Bubbles, who all have their distinct personality. Like Bubbles is the cutesy, crybaby one, Blossom is the natural leader, the morality compass, and then Buttercup, which is like the hot-headed, like can't control her temper type. And we see that they're competitive with each other and that they love to play games, and there's like a playfulness with this first experience of tag. It's so nostalgic to think of the first time you've ever played a game and how innocently they approach something like this. This is like one of their first social experiences. Like, we're seeing the girls actually figure out who they are through a competitiveness of like a fun little game. So the plot kind of kicks in a little bit here when the girls accidentally take this game of tag to the extreme, using all their superpowers to their advantage. And poor Townsville, like, things are getting even worse for it. I feel bad for the Townsville as a character. It feels like they're getting abused. But yeah, we basically get to see what it's like when you're a kid and you get to go out into the real world, but you know, you're not super socially cognizant of your surroundings, so you just act out. And it seems like the girls are just innocently having a good time here. And we get introduced to the mayor, who seems like he is staring out the window at the city getting destroyed and like kind of upset about it, but we learn that he's actually upset about a pickle and not necessarily Townsville. But luckily he has his secretary and the entire government to do the real work that he was gonna do. I think that led to that trope where it's like you see like a man in high of power in government and they are focused on clearly only themselves. It's like a funny trope that I think started coming back a lot more since then. We don't see this a lot in like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network. These girls are struggling with a lot earlier identity issues. Like, there's just a different growing pain you have to deal with from the Powerpuff Girls position versus like Timmy Turner as a 5th grader. You know, like, I kind of feel bad for the professor a little bit more at this point because he's like definitely very apologetic. Like, he sits and he talks to them about using his powers. Like, they just destroyed the world and he doesn't seem like an inch mad at them, which is cool. This is like the perfect father figure. I like how Professor Utonium kind of takes accountability. Like, he's very much aware that they're girls, they're just growing, like everything they're doing is normal, and he is so reliable. He's like a good parental figure. The professor is calm, collected, and he's just a good father. And you feel a lot more empathetic toward him because it's like the girls are created, you know, they're like an experiment, and to see him take such a mentoring role for things that don't necessarily exist, like the Powerpuff Girls, I mean, I guess they do exist, but you know what I mean. It just shows a lot of care in a person to take this kind of approach. He says people get scared when they see something unique, and that is 100% the big dramatic question of this entire movie. This is going to be the exact theme that causes all the concurrent events to transpire. So put on your seatbelts. We're gonna keep going. When the girls go back to class, of course, the entire class is so upset with them. Even the teacher is like basically saying how they have to go to school with no recess and this broken down place as we look at the girls, and there's this really sad spotlight on them from a hole in the roof, and it's cinematic, it's beautiful, and we feel horrible for the girls. The time that they're taking to like really make us feel for the characters is really fun. Things take a turn for the worse as the mayor actually arrests the professor who just wants to pick up the girls from school. It's really funny because it's like, that's his only goal. He's just like, I gotta pick up the girls from school, and they're basically like, yep, come with us, you're in trouble. It makes me feel really bad for the professor because it's like he's just trying to do a good thing, but like, you kind of get it. Like, the Powerpuff Girls are kind of a threat to everyone. But you feel for the professor, like you're on his side, so it does feel like a higher weight is given to the girls, and like, we're more worried about him. The girls are waiting at school for the professor to pick them up, and he doesn't come, so the girls are really devastated. We get to see them in their second fight, and it's always funny to watch them fight because you can really tell the differences between them. Like, they're so distinct in their own ways.
Come on, girls.
And they have this new goal of like, okay, we're just gonna walk home, which is something that the professor really didn't want to happen, and we feel like the danger of that because they're like, oh my god, these girls are just clearly not going to use their powers. They're not going to fly home. They just were told not to use their powers, so now they're walking home in this dangerous city as like pre-K students. There's another really funny sequence where we get to see the news and see how much everybody really hates the Powerpuff Girls, like what's going on with the professor, and it's intertwined with the mayor basically calling out everybody to worry about pickles more than this situation at hand.
Pickle caught killing!
Freaks. Back to you, Linda.
The whole idea of like the main characters being left behind in like a really young and innocent way is something that Craig McCracken definitely did in the pilot for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which is also a really good pilot. I feel like it's just as good as this one. But like, it's funny that we are starting to see his identity. Like, I wonder what he was like growing up. Like, was that really something that was a big deal, as being left behind? Because that is, I mean, he beautifully weaves it into his storytelling. I'm not complaining. And the music is Like it's just clear this is like his show. Like I see the whimsical music, the witty dialogue, and the heart. It's so grounded in heart, and it's definitely somebody who made both Foster's Home and this show. Like I'm starting to see it a lot easier. I like that friendship is usually the themes, like being unique seems to be consistent in both of his shows. And poor girls are really upset because they see what it's like when everybody hates them. Something that no girl in pre-K should experience. But I guess we're living in the TikTok age, so who knows? The plot seems to follow their walk home here further. And it's really cool because that reminds me of like a road trip movie. Like you have one destination and the girls are just get their way home. Then they see Mojo Jojo for the first time, and he's just like a shadow. Like these two eyes that peek out of the darkness. And that's a really cool first shot already. I mean, we saw him for a moment before, but this is like really his introduction. He like talks to the girls about what it's like to be a failure or to have uniqueness. Not necessarily be a good thing and really bite you in the butt. Of course, the girls really empathize with that. They're like, yeah, we know. Like, we were told that people find uniqueness scary. And this Jojo, the monkey, is taking essentially on the mentor role because now they don't really trust the professor as much as they did before they knew that he wasn't picking them up. From their perspective, the professor pretty much rejected them. They're convinced that the professor hates them. And that's the saddest part, I feel like. And I like how like the girls insist that this guy's good. Like they actually give Mojo a pep talk and are like, you know, you're definitely a good person. Even though he's blatantly telling them like, nope, I'm evil. I'm actually gonna destroy the world. They just seem to be like, no, you're not. I'm dwelling it down to sound like less intimate of a thing, but it's actually a really cute scene. We definitely can tell that he is kind of manipulating the girls. If you guys want to see more about manipulation in 2D cartoons, I recently made a video talking about my favorite arc in the old Kids WB Cartoon Network show Shaolin Showdown, and it's definitely worth watching, so please go check it out. And I love that the interaction with Mojo Jojo gives the girls the confidence to use their powers again. Like you see them fly up into the air and Mojo is so impressed and they suddenly have like this new relationship that the girls had never had before. It's their first experience with judgment, you know, like they meet somebody and they're like, okay, this is my judgment of this person based on what they know, and they don't know that much. They're like little girls. Like of course they're gonna have, you know, like their first impression of somebody before they know who to trust. Like you have to go wrong before you go right. Oh, and then I noticed this definitely that this is Craig McCracken's work when they're at the top of the volcano and the conversation is just going back and forth super quickly.
To harness the energy of the Earth's core for power.
What are you talking about?
The plan.
What plan?
Our plan.
To do what?
To make the town better, of course.
What?
Like they say a lot shorter phrases and they go through the characters quicker. It's a lot more natural of dialogue than any kid show I've really seen. And the girls actually help Mojo Jojo rebuild his tower, thinking that they're doing a nice thing with somebody who actually appreciates them. And so they really care about trying to make this guy happy because he's giving them positive reinforcement and they feel loved. I wish they made simple movies. When movie plots become more complex, it forces the characters to have to be simpler, and then the feelings like have to be even minuscule to none. Like there's not enough room for everything in there. So it feels like the more plots get complicated, the less characters have room to grow and the less feelings we could feel altogether. But if we pull back on our plot, like the Powerpuff Girls did, keep it super simple, we have room for more complex characters and even longer moments for small nuances like feelings.
He's not coming. He hates us. He totally hates us.
Writing feelings into a script is hard, especially when you're making complex plots all the time. And when you don't have those moments, the plots feel too fast. And film and TV just feels so fast nowadays. Like, of course there's not enough room to feel. What this does right is make the plot as simple as humanly possible. One thing leads to another based on the theme going on, which is uniqueness can make people scared. The best shows of kids content are good at making it breathe, having room for less complex characters, and even simpler plots so that way everything is digestible. The professor comes home and suffers pretty much because he was just beaten up in jail, I guess. This poor professor is like taking all the blame for all these girls' responsibilities. And he still has not gotten a chance to explain himself to them. And it's so sad because, of course, we know that they care about each other. They're just trying to get to each other. But there's so much in the way, and it's so much external issues like that are, it's almost toxic to their family and something they've built out of love so far in this movie. Then the girls think that they're actually successful, that their powers are going to be worth something, and maybe the professor will finally love them if they use their powers for good. The girls pick up Professor Utonium to show them what their powers did, how they helped Mojo Jojo, and meanwhile, Mojo Jojo was actually taking over the entire city of Townsville, like with all of his monkey friends. There's like a dialogue that's coincided with both, where it's like the girls are talking about how excited this new world is gonna be. Mojo Jojo is talking about how he pretty much owns this new world thanks to the help of the Powerpuff Girls, and they both basically hit each other at the same time. Powerpuff Girls are at the center of all of it. They've appointed Mojo Jojo.
Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, I couldn't have done it without ya!
The world is worse than it's ever been, and it's because of these girls using their powers. Like, there's nothing worse. To top off the darkest of the dark moment, Professor Utonium finally gives up on them, and it is, oh gosh, it's so heartbreaking.
Please believe us.
I don't know who to believe.
The girls don't even deal with it. They're just like, okay, we're out of here. They run away crying, and this is like one of the times where it's like very clear when there's like an act break, like this is the worst of the worst, and they actually are doing a good job cinematically telling us that this is like the beginning of the end, where they're looking through space and we see the asteroids, and we go to the girls, the Powerpuff Girls on the moon. They're like depressed and sad, sitting on the craters of the moon. Oh, I feel bad for them. Of course, they argue, and especially Blossom and Buttercup get into a really big argument, which kind of reminds me of Goku and Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z. Like, I mean, look at how similar these conversations feel. Okay, if you don't agree with me, whatever, comment below. They sit depressed until they hear the professor screaming from across the galaxy. What? They quickly jump off the moon and run all the way back to Earth. They're looking for the professor, trying to help him specifically, when they see so many worse things going on, and then they start to help other people, like save this kid's dog, save the baby. They start to inadvertently use their powers for something that a responsible person would use them for. And poor them, like they've never understood what is and isn't appropriate to use their powers for. Townsville doesn't know, and nobody's cutting them slack about it. The girls essentially have to take accountability for everybody else's issues. But it's really cool how like it just comes so naturally to them to do the right thing by helping all these people. And in a climactic moment, Mojo Jojo takes Chemical X, grabs the girls, and heads to the top of the mayor's building. In the end, like, the mayor congratulates them, the professor's proud of them, and everything seems to work out perfectly. And we get the narrator back. We get the first couple locations that we started out with in the movie, and it's a really sweet, conclusive ending as we start to transition with where Tom Kenny is basically the girl's narrator, and they come on in, and he talks as they just stand there in front of this beautiful heart-shaped background, and suddenly the show is officially established. This is the pilot episode of the Powerpuff Girls, essentially. Everything that happens in the regular show is after this, therefore this is the pilot episode. I know it's a movie, it was released theatrically, didn't do so well, but overall, like, this is such a beautiful film and a great start to a television show. I wish this almost was like integrated within the series. Like, it feels like one of those shows that just get thrown into the plot. But if you see the movie, you know that everything has a purpose, that everything is a little bit deeper than it was set out to be. And overall, it's just so good. I highly recommend watching this. If you ever had to watch the beginning to a show like Jimmy Neutron, there's just so many good 2000s cartoons to look at. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Johnny2000, and this is my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, I don't know, whatever you guys do on your free time. Do it to my channel. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Billy and Mandy's Big Boogey Adventure, essentially the Billy and Mandy movie. I recently did the Powerpuff Girls movie, and I was very inspired by the Cartoon Network style of storytelling, especially when it comes to features. I mean, it's really easy to create a cartoon that is without too much plot. I mean, I've seen a lot of the more recent SpongeBob movies do it. I've seen Fairly Odd Parents do it one too many times. Just to be able to do a feature film style story is a lot different than doing a 11-minute episode or even a 20-minute episode, which is as far as Billy and Mandy usually goes. I mean, obviously they have those 2-part episode, 40-minute ones, but this is entirely different. This is, fully 80 minutes. I consider it a feature-length film. Even though it didn't get in the theaters, it definitely should be taken as seriously as a feature film. So we start in the future with a dystopian Endsville. An evil known as the Lord of Horror orders robot duplicates, Billybot and Mandroid, to go back in time to eliminate Billy and Mandy and prevent them from reaching a powerful hand-like artifact in the Lord of Horror's possession before his past self does. Billy and Erwin of this time hope their past selves can actually stop the Lord of Horror's evil plans, and we're definitely really confused at what's going on right off the bat. I like that we start with everything is gone downhill, and even Billy and Erwin are at the worst of it. So could this end up being the future? I mean, obviously I want to stick around to find out. This is how I could tell this was a feature film, is when they had a really good committed opening. You know how films always have those cool montages with the cast and credits? Well, they did it in this episode. They do it in some specials, I've noticed, but this one does seem a little special. The animation is a little bit more Pixar. We see Grim in a giant monster car, the Boogeyman sweeping up, and it says a stupid film. And it looks like a lot of people did this. Even C.H. Greenblatt, which did Chowder. We're taking to present-day Endsville and a nice, beautiful wide shot to show us exactly where we're going, which is a good differentiation from the show. It's a little bit more cinematic than just appearing at Billy's house like the usual shots they'd use. We get to see Grim in his daily life getting ready to take somebody else's life. It's so funny that the Grimm's daily job is to take people's lives. That is such a crazy thing that will never be done in a kid's show ever again. He goes to General Scar's house, which is a recurring character that's really good. He tries to defend himself and almost argue why he shouldn't be taken, and we haven't seen Grimm taking a lot of lives in a while, so it's cool to see this be reintroduced, especially in the finale of the episode, to remind us kind of where we're coming from. Billy and Mandy appear to distract Grimm from his daily opportunity, letting General Scar get away. We get a really fun car chase with a lot of comical moments, and get to see a lot more of Endsville than we usually do, which is definitely a cinematic type experience. And he eventually gets away. They end up defeated at Billy's house again. For some reason, Erwin shows up in a panda suit, and it's just not talked about that much. And Billy's dad gives Grim advice on losing a job, which is really funny because I didn't realize how many jobs he's lost looking back.
My dad starts a new job almost every week. Billy's right, Grim. I've been fired before. And it's not bad. In fact, I get fired all the time.
But Grim is just so fed up with the kids, reminding them that, the fact that they had this pact and he lost this race in order to be their best friend is inevitably why he's still there today. And of course, it's cool that we're coming back to this concept because it's been, that's the origins of the show, and we definitely don't talk about it too much. Mandy says that he's, the only one that really cares that he's not doing his job correctly, but it's interrupted when a bunch of underworld military people arrest Grim. They go to the underworld court with the same judge from the Keeper of the Reaper episode, which is one of my favorites, and they put Billy, Mandy, and Grim on trial, when really, it's about Grim, but Billy and Mandy are there. They basically accuse Grim of using his powers for the worst reasons, and it's just so true. They're talking about how many people have used his scythe. It's like working as a farmer and giving your tractor out to random people, like a schoolyard girl that's going to elementary school for the first year. That's just unreasonable. The kids in Grim are exiled at the underworld court, placed in the custody of Boogey. With Grim being stripped of his jobs, the Boogeyman is playing a lawyer and essentially calling himself to the stand, which I don't think is legal at all. Genuinely, he's the Boogeyman, his job is to scare people, and he does not do a good job at it, which is a really funny character trope. We see Dracula, who has a lot of funny comments. He is my favorite character in this show, as they're in the court. And even Fred Fredburger's here, which is my absolute favorite. The verdict of the jury is that Grimm is guilty, so he will be stripped of all of his powers, and him and his quote-unquote accessories, which are the kids, will be sent to exile. So they're sent off with a bunch of other prisoners on the Boogeyman's ship. Meanwhile, General Scar is coming back from his chase with Grimm and is greeted by the Billy and Mandy robot, and they vaporize him, so we should be scared already. The two robots take Billy and Mandy's life to kind of get an intel on their information and what they can do to get rid of them. And Billy's dad welcomes Billy, basically not knowing the difference, and their seed is planted. Meanwhile, Grimm and his quote-unquote accessories and Fred Burger are on the ship. Grimm is upset because it's like, of course, nobody can replace him, he's the Grim Reaper, but then number 3 from Kids Next Door comes in.
The immortal souls of grown-ups, collecting my dark harvest with a cold iron blade! Yeah, that'll be fun!
Boogey reveals his plan that he is going to be heading to the Isle of Terror to get Horror's hand, which is capable of giving the worst fears and coming to life. Boogey believes that with its power, he can become actually scary and rule the underworld, while Grimm sees this as an opportunity to get his job back. Meanwhile, Mandy actually wants to collect the hand so she can rule. It's just everybody chasing after this one thing with the same goal, which is kind of cool. As they go from water to lava, everything becomes a lot more intense on the Boogeyman's hostile journey. Boogey has them walk the plank when Grimm is like, no, don't make them do it, they're just kids. But he does it anyway. As Billy's the first one to do it, he breaks out into song, and this song is actually super catchy. Listen.
Stereo, stereo, I'm scared but not very though. Scary, scary, stereo, I'm not scared from head to toe. Well, I'm scared not very low. I'm afraid I'm not scared at all.
Not being kicked or keelhauled?
My goodness, he is so brave and tall.
There's no braver boy I can recall.
I don't know if I'm thankful or appalled.
The song is about how Billy is a little bit scared, but not that much. I don't know why we need to sing about that emotion. Meanwhile, Grimm, Billy, Irwin, and Mandy escape on the death boat, exiting the ship. And we even get like a little thing at the side of the screen that makes it look like a music video that says Sergeant Pooper's Lonely Fart Club Sandwich, as if it's like a real music video. Meanwhile, Robot Billy and Mandy are fitting into the kids' normal lives, and Billy's dad still doesn't know the difference. And that's it. One of Boogey's pirates alerts him that Billy, Mandy, Grimm, and all them, they got away. Like, they're on their way to the hand as well. But Boogey's not worried because he thinks that they're essentially going to die almost getting there. Grimm has a meltdown and says basically he regrets everything that has ever happened in this show. And we get one more reference to the pilot episode, and Mandy kind of points out how he's going through the different stages of grief, which is a really impressive intertwine.
How could this happen?
Denial.
It's a mistake. No way this could happen.
Bargaining.
It's okay. It's okay.
After this whole dramatic moment is over, they get to the gate. It allows them to get to the hand, and they're stopped because, you know, there's a guy that's making them go through. We get to see Grimm's ID. The underworld has an ID system, but that's kind of funny. They say that they can't let them through the gate unless they complete a test, and everybody's kind of scared because, like, what could that be? They send out a troll that kind of looks like an ogre with a giant beating stick. The ogre eats the 4, and they say that they passed the test. What could that possibly mean? After a commercial break, we find them in the ogre's lair, or troll, I don't know what to call them, and they are being made into soup, ready to be eaten. Mandy ends up using Billy's flatulence to get out of the soup, tricking the ogre that they actually ruined the soup. The gatekeeper and the ogre attempt to eat them, but they get away. They're running around the room with the eyeball that allows both of them to see and throw it around like a football. This worries Boogey, who's watching the entire thing from the eye of the gatekeepers. Meanwhile, Robot Billy and Mandy come back to report to Boogey. I believe it was mentioned earlier that Boogey is actually the one in control of these robots, meaning that I think that he's the one in the beginning in the dystopian world that set them out. The robots report to Boogey, and everybody's disappointed because they have not gotten information, and apparently they've only retrieved emotion. A giant cake floats to Billy, Mandy, Grimm, and Irwin, saying happy birthday Billy and Mandy, and it's clearly something suspicious. Mandy immediately suspects it, but the boys eat anyway. The trick is completely fallen for, and the cake actually allows everybody to pass out. There's a cool cinematic moment where Mandy is watching herself. Essentially, everything gets blurry, and I think that's a cool idea. It turns out to be by the robots assisting Boogey. So we go into the darkest fears of all the main characters in their own nightmares as they are asleep. Everybody's is so significantly weird. Like, Billy's running on a horse of Grimm through space. I don't really know what to make of this, but it's fun that we got the wacky, absurd humor that the show is known for in this. Erwin is tied to a chair watching a giant axe swing above him, which is also kind of freaky. And number 3 makes another appearance, which is so funny. Boogey shows up in the nightmares and actually takes Mandy. As Grimm, Erwin, and Billy are falling, Erwin begs Billy to pee his pants because that usually wakes him up from a dream. It's successful, and they all come back to reality, but Mandy is still missing. Billy gets literally another piece of the cake again, which is a very Billy, and Erwin has had enough now that Mandy's stolen. She's tied to the front of the Boogeyman ship, and he asks Mandy to join him, but Mandy just refuses. I'm not sure Mandy's morality compass, because she wants to be evil herself, yet she doesn't want to work with Boogeyman. So it's just weird because it's like she's kind of loyal to Grimm, but she's also willing to step above Grimm for her own selfish power. I'm not really understanding what her code of ethics is here, especially because she's like, I'll never work with you. And it's like, well, you're willing to go evil by yourself, so I'm thinking you're definitely willing to do something like that. We cut to Mandy waking up from her own nightmares, thinking that everything that just happened was a dream. But it leads to another nightmare where she's with Billy, Grimm, and Erwin, but they're not actually them. They're some deformed monster. And then it transformed into all these evil unicorns attacking Mandy, and then she wakes up into a black void, and it turns out that she was having a nightmare while still on the Boogeyman ship. That was a hard one to gather. Seems like the tone of this is a lot about people's fears and nightmares, which is funny because that's exactly what's driving the Boogeyman. He's scared of people not actually fearing him, so he has to act like a jerk just to make up for that insecurity. Erwin comes onto the ship and saves Mandy by defeating all the crew villains, kind of like a video game, and Billy and Grimm watch. I kind of wish this was a musical number because the one with Billy was pretty good, and I feel like if we had this too, that would even be better. They save Mandy, who is now still asleep, and Erwin kisses her to wake her up. I think this kiss kind of confirms Erwin's arc, but I don't know. After Mandy throws up, her robot counterpart comes up against her, and the two face off, with the robot clearly not matched up to Mandy's evil. Mandy takes the laser that the robot Mandy was holding and uses the laser as a diversion for all of them to get back off of their ship and onto their own boat. They get to the island of peril, where they walk up these long, winding stairs to the Hand of Terror. So they get to Horror the Ancient, which guards the Hand of Terror, and he gives a little bit of lore saying that he concentrated all his evil to his left hand, then cut it off. It's a weird story, but I also wish we got a little bit insight into his life, because that would be a really compelling backstory. They say that in order to get the Hand of Terror, that they are going to battle him in a game of wits. He tells them that during the battle, he will try to strike him with his spear, which is not fair, bro. Erwin starts talking to this guy on a personal level, and they really bond for a moment, but then the guy gets even more angry. The guy says that if he gets defeated, they're gonna have to suffer their greatest fear anyway. And Billy is taken by a giant squid. Boogey shows up last minute, putting an anchor on Erwin. Boogey is here ready to get Horror's hand. They come to a stalemate when they both get to the Hand of Horror, and the ancient guy tells them that they could face off in Cannibal's Run, which is a race through the underworld, and the winner will get a chance to fight the Ancient Man and get a chance to get the Hand of Horror. Without Billy, it's time to race the Boogeyman on his ship, and it's clear that he is definitely going to win. Mandy has a moment where she misses Billy because they don't hear anything from him, but it's taken away quickly after the act break as Billy just comes back from the squid, which is kind of anticlimactic. I wish we had more of a moment for everybody to miss Billy. Like, these emotional beats are those things that are supposed to make a film breathe as opposed to plot to plot to plot, which is kind of sad because the emotional beats are the part we're here for, but they just want to focus on the comedy and the humor. I don't know, that's just kind of their decision. Billy's back in time for the race, and they all begin. Cannibal's Run. Boogey tries to play unfair and attack the other ship, but Billy saves them. They end up going through this giant portal, which adds them all being puppets, and it's really funny because they've done this before, but this is funny. I like that all these Cartoon Network shows have a reference to puppets one way or another, like Chowder does it a lot. I've seen this show do it before. And maybe I'm also thinking of Channel Chasers from Fairly Odd Parents, but, it's funny. It seems like each of these locations are more of small bits, especially considering that, everything in the movie thus far is a different trial and tribulation, and then now we're going into like a speed run. As the race continues, they go through a bunch of different puzzling spots, and even the two cyborgs, Mandy and Billy, are on Boogey's ship still. I call them Boogey. In the end, Grim gets to the race first, leaving Boogey behind. Boogey is obviously really angry, which makes sense. Finally, our main characters get the hand and are forced to face their biggest fears. It just feels like everything is one thing after another. We get a little moment where we see everybody's fears, and it's just a comedy situation because it's like Erwin doing stand-up in front of bears, Billy facing a clown, and Mandy facing her grandmother, or a fat version of herself, which is kind of disrespectful. Finally, Grim gets the hand of horror, and it's back to normal. But in a last-minute effort, Boogey steals it. He uses it to erase Grim, and we don't know where he went. And he's celebrating, but, you know, what happened to Grim? Grim reappears, and Grim starts laughing at the Boogeyman. It turns out that this is all a part of the Boogeyman's fear since he's holding the Hand of Terrors. He just doesn't want to be laughed at, and the fact that Grim's laughing at him actually defeats him, which is a really cool way to take down the villain. The villain is defeated by his own fear, because Billy, Mandy, Erwin, and Grim really drive it home that he's not scary, and it's finally the thing that defeats him, which is really rewarding. Everybody laughs as he falls down and gets run over by a train. This is a little cruel, guys. I mean, this show's been known to be cynical, but watching Boogey die in multiple ways is kind of intense. Turns out Grim is actually really scary because he's not afraid of his own fears, which is a really interesting concept. They all talk about what they're gonna do with the hand, but inevitably, everybody celebrates because they got the hand, and everything is all right. And the judge comes back for one last sentence. He says he's going to banish them forever, and the plot's not over yet, it seems. Quick commercial break, and we're back at it. So the main characters are at the hands of the judge once again, and Mandy demands that Grim gets his job back. Grim celebrates, gets his scythe back, and his power. Then future Billy appears back, and I'm not sure if this is super relevant, but he's naked. Grim says he's going to destroy the Hand of Terror so nobody has to ever use it again, which is totally a good thing to do. I don't know why Grim says he's evil. Grim and Mandy have a moment where they say they shouldn't be afraid of their feelings, and it's kind of insightful for a second. This all turns out to be a TV show watched by Billy and Mandy the robots, ending the entire movie. I definitely think this is a really good movie. I feel like it could have done a lot better if every trial and tribulation Billy and Mandy went through prior to the race was a reflection of their fears in a non-direct way. Like, people kept saying fears, but I feel like we needed to know what the biggest issue with each character was and why that was tested, as opposed to being so literally just thrown out, and be more comedic as opposed to a character-developed issue. I mean, of course, I feel like everybody on the writing team felt a little spoiled because they had 6 years to grow these characters, and they're like, let's just have fun for this one. And I definitely think fun was had, and I think it was a great special, but I do think the emotional depth was more necessary, and they didn't try to hit it so much. It seems like they were just so excited to get so many events in this hour and 20-minute film that they forgot about the character growth and the emotion. I mean, they made up for it in the sense that they kept falling back to the original reason that Grim was here. They leaned into the fears, like the Boogeyman's fears, Mandy and Billy's fears, but they only came in sparsely in a beat at a time, and none of them lasted for too long. Like when Mandy missed Billy, that could have been a really impactful moment, but since it was so brief and far in between, and we never built up to seeing why that relationship was so important specifically throughout this special, like it just felt like it was like a come and go type thing. And I definitely also think the antagonist could have had a more intense motivation, or even a bigger looming threat. Of course, like, the entire underworld, Grim losing his powers, is super high stakes, and that's great, but it seemed like the judge was stronger than the Boogeyman somehow. And I think the SpongeBob movie did a better job in the sense that they had a threat that was threatening the entire world and not just the underworld, or they're all stuck here at one time. I mean, it feels like we aren't really worried with all the mortality issues throughout the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy series, that people are gonna die, or that there's like a huge risk to things, but I do think that could have been implemented better. The Powerpuff Girls did a great job at making Mojo Jojo threatening and manipulative in a really earned way, as opposed to just a recurring character coming back for another round. With all this to say, it is definitely a really good TV movie. I think it could have been a better feature film movie. Powerpuff Girls was a good feature film movie and worked as a TV movie, but I wish Billy and Mandy was used as a feature film format, because the best parts of this are the parts that lean toward it being a feature film format. The more they lean back into it being like an episode of the show is where it had its weakest points. But overall, I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I think they could have done better, but I don't think it was bad, and I think it's a good way to end the series and recycle the original plot lines to what brought Billy and Mandy together to begin with, and, you know, all around just a very interesting movie. Not as memorable as I would hoped, but it was worth the ride. Have you guys seen this recently? Do you remember it? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Johnny2000, and for more 2000s content, don't forget to like and subscribe to Johnny2000. Okay, guys, have a great day. Have you ever watched a TV movie and been like, oh my god, why is this just a TV movie? It's like actually so good. It's cinematic, there's story elements of a feature film, the characters have a lot of growth. Like, this doesn't only need to be fit to this medium screen. I feel that a lot, especially recently as I've been watching a lot more Cartoon Network specials, from finales to pilots. Cartoon Network has really done a good job at crafting feature-length narratives that really do justice to its characters. While not everyone has been perfect, and I feel like some have some really glaring issues, I do think it's important to revisit them. Whether it's the origin stories, like the Powerpuff Girls, or finales, like Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and Ed, Edd and Eddy. But this one was very impactful. It was another Craig McCracken one. The Powerpuff Girls did a really good job at establishing characters for the first time, situations that the world might be dealing with, and it translates really well to his new show, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. I know it sounds funny because I'm saying new when really it went on for 6 seasons, like literally 10 years ago, but every franchise starts somewhere, and the same way the Powerpuff Girls started with a feature-length pilot, essentially Foster's Home copied this. We talked a little bit about the commercial failure of the Powerpuff Girls, but we're not really going to get into it super much, but it definitely explains probably why this pilot of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends was a feature-length episode, but didn't get the feature treatment, especially not getting put in theaters. And this one is, I was going to put this in the pilots video I made for Cartoon Network, but I feel like it just didn't do it justice. Like, this wasn't just a pilot. This is a full-length, like, really good movie. I sometimes would even think that it got better than the Powerpuff Girls. But hey, let's not get too into it. Without further ado, this is Johnny2000, and let's break out some more 2000s nostalgia. What's up, everybody? It's Johnny2000. So we're going to be talking today about House of Bloos, which is the official pilot for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. About 80 minutes in length, it's split up into 3 24-minute episodes to kind of fit the broadcast time and be normal episodes of the show. So instead of starting at episode 1 of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, we essentially get 3 episodes, and they did a movie, so it seems like from a business standpoint, these guys are all satisfied. There's a lot going on in this, so let's break it down. We see Blue and Mac being attacked by a dark shadow that turns out to be Francis, Mac's brother. He runs around the house chasing him, and it gives me a lot of Fairly OddParents vibes, like how Vicky was with Timmy Turner. This was kind of the same relationship. This kid literally takes Mac and his imaginary friend and swings them across the room. Like, this guy is so abusive in a way that I've never seen in a kid's TV show. Like, Francis is diabolical. He also kind of reminds me of Roderick from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, if anybody has seen that. Like, I could totally see this being a Diary of a Wimpy Kid world. The mom comes in and she's actually angry at Mac and Blue for getting bullied, but then it turns out that the mom actually is fair and she calls out Francis on him.
And I expect him to act like the oldest and set a good example by telling the truth.
Ha! But Mommy, I was telling...
Terrence, you expect me to believe that a 13-year-old boy was overpowered by an 8-year-old and his cute little imaginary friend?
So we respect this woman. It's interesting that they never show us her face. Like, we've seen so many characters throughout this entire series, and we never saw Mac's mom's face. Not that I want to, I'm just saying. Mac's mom tells Mac that they need to talk, and Blue overhears as Mac's mom explains why he needs to let go of having an imaginary friend. Like, he's becoming too old for this. It's kind of like a metaphor for, like, growing up and needing to let go of things. Some of the most generic plots, in a good way, though. I love how seriously it's taken. Like, the emotion is so real. And somebody telling their son they need to let go of their best friend, like that would have been my worst nightmare at that age. Oh, it's so sad immediately. We get a little funny sequence where little Blue is watching TV and everybody's talking about abandonment and he's like, well, I guess this is my life. He sees a commercial though about Foster's Home, an imaginary friend palace where all the imaginary friends that get left behind live, kind of like an orphanage for friends. I don't know if that's like a proper way to say it though. Mac and Blue decide they want to check out the place, and they're greeted by Mr. Harriman, this large butler-like rabbit.
The head of business affairs at this facility, and am in no way a butler or any other member of the service trade.
The fact that Blue knows he's about to be abandoned, so he's asking Mac to take him to a new shelter to live, is a really dark concept for a kid's show. I don't know if you guys have heard, but they're doing a spin-off show, like a preschool track show with Craig McCracken and the creator of the show, and I wonder if they're gonna bring this up. So Mr. Harriman thinks that the boys are there for a tour, so he has Miss Frances come take them on one. She comes down like a maid. She's kind of like the older sister to the main cast already, and it feels like that kind of dynamic immediately, because she just takes care of the house, and she seems to really enjoy what she does. I don't know, she's a really respectable character, and I guess we kind of feel it like right off the bat. Like, we definitely like Miss Frances. Will takes Mac and Blue on the whole tour of the place, and it's just a lot of comedic sequences, but like also funny realities that there are so many different unique rooms that encapsulate like thousands of different personalities. I don't know, it's kind of sweet to think that this is a representation of like, oh, the weirdest and most unique people all exist under the same house, and these unique rooms that is almost like a community of people that are inherently very different from each other. And I like how we're still talking about Madame Foster, like this really powerful woman that is so powerful we never even get to see her, and yet she decides what goes on in the house. It's her home. She makes the rules. Like, it's just godlike figure. Throughout the tour, we get to know a little bit more about Madame Foster. Like, the music is so cute for this. I don't mind it going on for like 3 full minutes, and the montage is interesting enough that we're like really getting a vibe for the whole house. Wilt mentions that there's also some really bad imagined friends, and we meet Duchess, a really stubborn, elderly woman type person. I don't even know what her personality is.
She's ugly.
She's evil. She is indeed.
We see a glimpse of a scary purple monster that continues to come out, but it's too shy to approach them until one of the dangerous imaginary friends actually threatens Mac's life and picks him up from the ground. But this monster comes in to save him, and his name's Eduardo. Blue immediately jumps on him and bites him as his instinct. I don't know why he thinks this is the correct thing to do in this situation. Defending Mac. It's interesting to think that they're also like slowly telling us there's some really dark things going on here, that like, we got some great personalities, but we also have some interesting personalities. I don't know. That's what I'm being communicated with right now. Mac is excited because this is a win-win for everybody. Like, Blue can live here, he could live there, and they could stay friends. It's so cute, the amount this kid is willing to go to keep his friend in his life. Like, it's definitely the ultimate goal to have a character be like, oh, my entire obstacle in life is making sure I have time with my friends. It's like, there's something wholesome about that. But unfortunately, the friends break it to them that that's not how it works. That if Blue has to stay here, it means he's officially up for adoption. So somebody can go ahead and take him away at any point. Wow, these are really dark rules. Blue is like, okay, I'm gonna try to stay here. And Mac is worried, but he doesn't really have a choice. He tells him like, okay, I'm gonna have to be back tomorrow. But Miss Frances says, like, if you're not back by 4 o'clock, I think it is, you're going to be leaving your friend vulnerable to be adopted. So, like, we'll keep him here for you, but as of 4 p.m. tomorrow, like, it's out of our hands. Blue is terrified, and it is so sad to see that Mac has to leave him there for the night at this strange new place. It's really depressing. Seeing Mr. Harriman be such a cynical person, being like, yep, he's never coming back, with like no apologies, it's like kind of dark. We end part 1 in anticipation. Will Mac return at 2 p.m. before Blue will be adopted, or will something happen? Ooh, it's exciting because it works as the first act of a movie and a part 1 of a TV show. Like, what? It's the best of both worlds. Blue wakes up and he's like already really nervous that Mac is not going to be showing up. Mac is watching a picture of Blue, so we know that he's definitely intending to go back. But there's just something off. Like, there's just sadness in both of their hearts because, of course, like, this is the first time they have to spend time apart. Like being an adult stinks. Oh God, that got existential. So the next morning, it's adoption day, and there's a family that actually is really interested in Blue. Miss Francis introduces herself, and we get to see that this is a bratty little girl that doesn't really have any empathy for other characters. She just wants a friend as a sort of like a trophy, which is an interesting concept, that she sees them as this like social currency that she feels entitled to. Oh my God, what the heck, this little girl, why is she so dynamic? Duchess introduces herself as like, oh, this is the right kind of family, they're rich. And they kind of go along with it as if it's gonna happen. But meanwhile, it's like the little girl clearly wants Blue. She wants to adopt Blue. So Blue's trying not to be adopted, but clearly perfect for what this girl wants. Like something she can manipulate, something simple like Blue. And while Mac is like going through his normal daily life, Blue is fighting for survival to not become somebody else's best friend. Have you guys been there before? Because I have. Blue and all his new friends, and this is adorable, they all are helping him get away from this little girl in this running around the house sequence, and they're just trying to keep a distance between Blue and this little girl, because obviously she might adopt him just on time. And this is so depressing that, like, of course this girl just wants to use this guy as a friend, and everyone around him is just like, yeah, I guess if it's just paperwork, it's paperwork. Speaking of paperwork, Frankie and Mr. Harriman are signing away Blue's adopted papers, but right before they could sign, Mac shows up, saves the day. After Blue successfully gets away from the bratty little girl, we find out that Terrence is watching where Mac has been going. You remember Terrence, obviously, the big bully in the house? He meets up with Duchess, and the two have like such a really weird chemistry. They both have common enemies, which is Blue and Mac. Duchess is mad because obviously she could have went with that family if Blue hadn't ruined it, which I don't think is true, Duchess. They make a plot together, and it brings us to part 3. Terrence visits Mac in his room basically to tell him that he knows what he's been up to. He locks him in the closet, and it's very clear what the plan is about to become. Suddenly it's about to be 4 o'clock the next day, and Mac has not shown up. We see Blue depressed, and his new friends are just as disappointed. When they think Mac shows up, it turns out to be Terrence, Mac's older brother. He poses to be like a really nice and considerate kid, and Mr. Harriman does not realize what he's dealing with. We see a really stressful moment where Mac is trying to get out of the closet to get to Blue, but meanwhile Terrence is filing the final paperwork. Yeah, the worst possible scenario of who Blue could be adopted by. Mac is able to get out of the closet by attaching a magnet to a key, and meanwhile Duchess is getting ready for something worse. She goes up to the monster that hurt Mac earlier and releases him. Mac shows up and all the friends are mad at him. Even Coco has a speech.
It's fine. Now look, we gotta try and get him back, cause... You go, girl!
And he explains what happened. Mr. Harriman doesn't believe him, but tries to warn them about Terrence's plan. They show up at this junkyard where Terrence brings Blue hostage, and Duchess reveals her plan to get rid of him. There's a funny dialogue between Terrence and Blue, and this show is just so impressive with its dialogue writing. I said it during the Powerpuff Girls, but like the awkward, like quick, short phrases, it's really good.
If everyone is saying blue hoo, that means they're crying, right? That means they obviously remember me, so I won't be forgotten.
Right, because if they're crying, they must miss you. And to miss you, they have to remember you. So they'll remember to not forget.
No, you had it. You can't forget what you remember, so...
No!
This giant monster comes up, and it kind of looks like evil Pac-Man, ? And it begins to try to devour Blue. Blue runs away around the yard, but his friends all show up just in time with a unicorn. I mean, I guess it's important because it's like we want to embrace the imaginary friends, and of course most would be unicorns. But things take a turn when the monster goes after everyone. Mac finds a way to defeat him by taking all of his legs and trapping them, all the bombs of his legs, and trapping them in Coco's eggs. This montage is really fun because it's an action sequence in a more comedic-based show. Like, it made sense in Powerpuff Girls, but here it's just like, there's a lot of chase scenes, there's a lot of comedic moments, and it really draws back to the setup of the story, which I'm so happy they are very serious about how this goes. We get to see everybody's unique ability, like Eduardo's ability to be super friendly, Wilt's ability to use basketball, that was all introduced in the first part of this 3-part episode. And we get to see a little bit more of everybody, all while doing it in a really fun way. Even Duchess and Terrence have some funny dialogue as they're watching on the sidelines like a football game.
There, do something! Shut up, will ya? I'm trying to watch this.
They all work together and save Blue. Finally, the evil monster turns against Terrence and Duchess and eats them. And just when you think it's all over, Blue is still being chased by this giant Pac-Man. It's funny because he literally is a ghost, so I bet the writers knew what they were doing here. And Duchess gets in absolute trouble. Mr. Harriman and Frankie have one last argument about why these rules shouldn't be in place, but we're interrupted by the almighty Madam Foster. Yes, finally, Miss Foster is making her appearance. And it's very powerful because she uses her one and only moment to give permission to Blue and Mac that Blue could live there and Mac could come visit him, which is all they've ever wanted. And of course, Madam Foster is super short, just like the mayor. For some reason, Craig McCracken thinks that the almighty people need to be short. I don't know why that's necessary, but I like it. And we calm the climax with one last funny bit of dialogue.
Oh, okay. What? Okay.
Okay, what?
It's okay. You mean, yeah.
Really?
Sure, you're kidding. No, he can, yeah.
And I won't be?
Nah. Really? Yes. How many times do I have to say it?
And finally, this 3-part episode comes to a close. We have Terrence and Duchess taken down. The evil bratty girl doesn't get away with Blue, and Mac is finally able to juggle friendship and his adult responsibilities responsibly. I mean, you could say that grammatically correct, you know what I mean. Everything feels so well-deserved, and the stakes are raised at such an even pace that there's enough comedy and enough escalating issues for us to come back to this resolve. I actually had a lot of trouble finding this special. Like, I had DVDs of this 3-part. Sure, it was on streaming services, but it's not really easy to get my videos that way. I tried through DVD means, where I have the first 3 episodes, but that also was like impossible to somehow get to my computer. With a bunch of research and all these online places, it almost was like finding House of Blues was impossible. And it shouldn't be. It should be accessible, it should be easy to find. If it was a feature film, it would be a lot easier to find, like the Powerpuff Girls was, versus like one random obscure episode in the middle of the series. So thank you guys for your patience, because I've been wanting to do this one for a while. And that was the pilot for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. I can't believe how impressive this special is and how well it holds up for what it is. Like, we get to know Mac, Blue, Mac's brother, Mr. Harriman, all the main characters of Foster's, all in this hour and a half. I think it's only impressive because of the fact they were given this amount of time. I don't think there's a world where this would have been fit into one episode. Like, if they had an official pilot, it probably would have thrown us into a scenario with the characters, but the fact that there's a little bit of a backstory that is always held through the rest of the series is really important. Obviously, Craig McCracken has done it before with Chemical X and the Powerpuff Girls. Like, he just likes to have a hard hand in the lore that leads up to the start of the show, and I really respect that. Not many people get the opportunity to do that. Usually they sell a show and it's like, oh cool, we get to jump into it in an audience-friendly manner, but this was a very artistically friendly manner where we actually took our time. This is the perfect template for what a Cartoon Network movie should be. I think the only thing they're missing was a theatrical release. But what do you guys think? Has it been a while since you guys have seen this? I would love to know more about how this rings a bell for you and what you guys think of this compared to the other movies. This is Johnny 2000. Thank you guys so much for watching.